what popular foods are eaten during Ramadan, and are there alternative and healthier ways to prepare and cook these?
So I'll answer that. So I think the majority of there's going to be different cultures that are going to be fasting, and so it will vary. Generally, there's likely to be a lot of stews and curries that are cooked during Ramadan. There's going to be a lot of rice consumed too. And really, I would just re-emphasize that it's really important to try and make your food as nutrient dense as possible. So have more of the beans, more of the vegetables, as opposed to the carbohydrates that will make you fuller. Although we do need the energy, we need the energy to be very nutrient dense, not just energy dense. And so I would really emphasize to focus on that.
Okay, awesome. And Dr. Zaf, is in the way that we prepare and cook the food, does that play an important role in kind of the nutrients that our body takes from the food? Is that quite important?
Oh, very much so. Unfortunately, in some cultures, there is a tendency to open the fast with very sweet foods or fried foods. And the problem that you have is that, especially when you're opening your fast, you're going to be very hungry, if you suddenly go in and go, right, I'm going to try and consume as much as possible, especially if you're eating the wrong kinds of foods, before you know it, as I said, by the time that the signal has gone to the brain that actually you need to slow down, it's too late. You've consumed way too much. And what you should really be doing is trying to avoid those kind of foods which are energy dense. So what I mean by that is the fried foods which contain lots of the unhealthy fats and contain too much energy, because at the end of the day, you've also got to remember that during Ramadan, if you have too much food taken on board and you're not going to be burning it, what's going to end up happening is that's going to end up being stored. So it is definitely about pacing yourself, and a good trick is really to open your fast with something, and it's customary to open your fast with a date and some water. And then again, just to slow down, have a very small meal to start off with, and then wait a bit and then have a slightly larger meal. But really, it's about avoiding those foods. So things like crisps, chocolates, certainly not starting with those as your first meal when opening your fast, because as I say, those won't really satisfy you. You can consume a lot of that very, very quickly. And unfortunately, as I say, you'll take on too much energy, which you're not going to be able to burn up later.
Is it better to combine a date with healthy fats and protein when you break your fast?
So certainly there's no reason why you can't. Things like seeds, certain fruits are fine to have. And dates, as I say, are certainly a very good way of opening the fast, because of the fact they contain quite a few different types of sugars, also contains fiber as well. And so it's certainly very good to open the fast with a date, because it will help give you that little release of sugar, which will help you stop feeling so tired quickly as well.
Rule of thumb, how many dates is a kind of good quantity to consume when you first open your fast?
I normally go for a couple, 2 or 3. Really, I think that's more than enough, unless somebody else has got any other suggestions.
Awesome. Okay, cool. So, Melissa, some of the families that we work with, they're struggling to get hold of the same foods that they're used to cooking with. And it's kind of causing a bit of an issue when it comes to kind of with their families and small children consuming new foods. And I guess the question that I want to ask is, if families are struggling to get hold of fresh food items, what alternative food items could they use to ensure that they have a balanced diet?
Yeah, so I mean, it's quite difficult, as we all know, with supermarket shortages and things like that. Sometimes the fresh produce we want is not always there, but frozen, tinned, dried are all just as good as fresh. So those are all really good alternatives: frozen veg, frozen fruit, if you have a freezer. And also, instead of fresh meat, you can be using things like nuts, lentils, pulses, nut butters, even things like chickpeas, hummus. Those are all going to be good alternatives, and they're going to obviously sit in your cupboard quite a bit longer. And I think sometimes with kids, you can really struggle if they're not used to the food, then they might not want to eat it necessarily. But it's really about using this opportunity to try new foods together as a family. So you may be getting the children involved in cooking, get them involved in choosing the food, you know, all sit down and decide what your recipe is going to be for that evening. And obviously, like we said before, being a good role model. So you have to eat dinner with them. You have to eat dinner as a family. You have to show them that you're enjoying the food, and then they're more likely to enjoy the food as well.
So would you say there are strategies for kind of parents and carers if a child is refusing a new food to kind of introduce and expose them to new foods?
Yeah, so exposure and role modeling are the two big ones that we always talk about. So keep introducing them. Never force a child to eat, because that often backfires, especially if your kids are stubborn like mine. But always introduce them, leave it on their plate, let them decide. And obviously we don't want to waste food, because food is scarce right now, but have a backup plan. So if you're presenting some new vegetables, maybe know that if they don't eat them, then you can use them in a stew the next day, or a curry or a soup. So have a backup plan for food that maybe doesn't get eaten as well.
Okay. And if families are going to the supermarket and picking up ingredients that they've never used before, are there any resources or apps that they can go to so they can kind of, I guess, put in a load of ingredients and maybe it spits out kind of a recipe or kind of something that can help them come up with kind of recipes, I guess?
Yeah, so the BBC Good Food app obviously has, you can enter your ingredients and they can tell you some different recipes that you can use from those ingredients. Also, I always recommend to people the Forest Food Bank has a whole load of recipes that are store cupboard staples. So they use things like tinned meat and chickpeas and hummus and dried pasta to make really, really good recipes. So that's another one that I would recommend.
Okay, thank you. And Dr. Kawther, we talk about making smart food choices every day, and it's something that public health go on about getting this message out. But in terms of, we talk around eating slow releasing carbohydrates when breaking your fast. What does this actually mean? And what, could you give me an example of some of the foods that are slow releasing carbohydrates?
Sure. So here we're talking about like whole grain. We're talking about pulses, vegetables. Vegetables have carbohydrates too, and they are slow releasing. We're also talking about brown rice, brown pasta, and all of these are different varieties that will slow down the release of glucose into your bloodstream. This is important, and it will make, particularly when you're talking about breaking your fast, or actually the pre-dawn breakfast that some people will be having. It's advisable that everyone has it, and that is eating before sunrise. And during this time, you're going to be looking at foods that are combining some source of protein as well as a carbohydrate that is slow releasing. And this is important because you want to feel fuller for longer. You've got a long day ahead where you're not going to be able to eat much, any food, and therefore you want to be having foods that are going to be making you feel fuller for longer. So examples would be combining a brown bread with scrambled eggs, having overnight soaked oats, having any high fiber breakfast cereals with milk. So here we're looking, and all these examples we're looking at a source of protein as well as a slow releasing carbohydrate.
Okay, awesome. And in terms of how important is it to kind of make sure we're on top of our salt intake as well, and we're not excessively adding more salt to meals?
So again, this is a really important area during Ramadan, because we're not going to be drinking any water during the day, and therefore we need to avoid as much as possible not just adding salt to our food, but all the different types of salty ingredients. And the main point is actually the short-term impact of this is you're going to be feeling thirsty if you're going to be having too much salt. So other salty ingredients, apart from what you're adding when you're cooking or at the table, we're looking at different types of cheeses. There are some really salty varieties that are common to be consumed by different cultures that will be fasting. So for example, halloumi, one of the saltiest cheeses, feta cheese, again a very salty cheese. And so if you are going to be having these, you need to reduce them or have very small amounts. But also if you're going to be, I don't know, some people might find it easier because they're tired to go for some ready meals, try to opt for those that will have lower levels of salt, and just to generally add less to your food. I would add there are also different components in, let's say, Middle Eastern cuisine, where there is high amounts of salt, so all different types of pickles, olives. These are all like additions. They're not even part of the main meal, which will add levels of salt to your diet, and therefore could risk making you feel more thirsty while you're fasting, and we don't want that, particularly on a summer's day.
Okay. And in terms of kind of managing our sugar intake so we don't peak and then drop again, are there any apps or resources out there that the public can use to kind of manage what they are putting into their body?
So I could recommend 2 different apps. So there is the government Change for Life app, which is the Sugar Smart app, where it will show you by scanning the barcode how much sugar there is in different types of products. As well as there is another app called Food Switch, which you can also scan the barcode of different products, and it will show you, particularly for products that don't have color-coded labeling on the front of pack, so it doesn't show you if it's a red for sugar. This app essentially will try and convert the label to a color code, and you could easily tell you if it's red for sugar, and therefore it's higher in sugar. And ideally you would want to go for products that are either amber or green for sugar.